was a really big survival story about him and all the people who cared about him and what they were going through to get him to recover and how much they needed him to come home because they just needed one win that summer.
Welcome to another edition of Living Boldly with Purpose. And I'm Dr. B. I'm your host today. And as always, super excited to talk to our guests and talk to guests about how not only are they living boldly with purpose, but what are they doing to make an impact and a change in our world. And today, I get to talk to AJ today, and just excited about her talking about her new book and talking about, it happens, today happens to be her birthday. Which is so exciting that she's willing not only to spend time with us today on her birthday, but the fact that she got to live another year and to begin, the next year of her life and all the exciting things that get to happen. And she is a professor, and as I have been, and it's just when you think about education, you think about molding minds, whether they're young minds, older minds. It is just so fun to be able to give of ourselves. And, I'm not sure, we haven't talked about her retirement or the things that she wants to do, but I can say for me, my birthday is going to be tomorrow. And I don't think I'm going to retire. I can't imagine, I can imagine slowing down and doing things differently, but I don't know, AJ, if I could just sit in a lawn chair or watch TV all day, or, and not do stuff where I'm trying to make a difference in other people's lives. And I kind of get that vibe from you a little bit, that's kind of the way that you are. So, so excited to talk to you. So I've asked her to tell her story. I told her she could start anywhere in life, and I know she wants to talk about her book as well, but would just love to get to know, sometimes, and one of the unique things about the show here that I love is that, sometimes I ask people to give us their bio. And they kind of tell us about what they do, but we really don't get to know who they are. And so by hearing some of their story, we really get to know the person a little bit. And so thank you, AJ, for being willing to share with us today, being on the show. And then we'll just kind of chop it up after you kind of tell your story. So the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I was in the corporate world for the first half of my career, 25 years. And then I retired and moved to Montana to be a college professor, which requires a lot of academic writing. And so I'm a writer, but mainly an academic writer. I have published several children's books that are in the curriculum here in Montana. And I met Dan Steffensen, who my latest book is about, on a shoot that my marketing students were doing for promoting firefighter calendars to raise funds for PPE, personal protective equipment, because Dan Steffensen was burned, caught in a fire on duty, and he was burned over 60% of his body, third-degree burns. And he lived. He was not supposed to live, but he did. And I met him on this shoot that my students were doing because he was helping us, sell these calendars to raise money for personal protective equipment that saved his life. And he saw that I had written some children's books. I wrote a column for the Billings Gazette, and he said, "Would you write my book?" And I said, "Dan, normally I write academic articles for journals, or I'm pretty good at 1,000 words. I've never written a nonfiction novel before." And he said, "Well, I bet you can do it." Anyway, so I decided I would give it a try, and it took 2.5 years of a lot of emotion and research and interviews with about 50 people. And so we launched the book last year. It's all about him, and it's called Burned Over, The Survival of Montana Firefighter Dan Steffensen. And so I can mainly talk about his story and how he amazingly survived. He's at the time he was 65 years old and was on rheumatoid arthritis medicine, which lowers your immune system. So when they flew him into the Utah Burn Center, they figured he was going to die. They have a honor guard that meets them at the airplane and stands over them until they die. And for some reason, he kept living. He was in a coma for, several weeks, and he just never died. And anyway, that's why I'm here to talk about the book.
All right. Well, yeah. Go ahead and just share with us the story that you want to share and the story you want to tell, and how it can impact the book. And then after that, we'll ask some questions about it.
Well, it was difficult to write because, first of all, it's about the town of Red Lodge, Montana, which sits at the very edge of Yellowstone National Park, the northern edge, and it's surrounded by pine trees and lots of what we call fuel, grass and trees. So everybody it's a small town, but everybody in town is basically a first responder. They all volunteer for the local fire department because they're always on alert for fire season. And that summer was called 2021 was what they refer to as the summer of hell. It started with a huge fire that almost burned down the town. It was that big of a fire. It came over the mountain. They call it Mount Maurice, which is at the foothills of the Beartooth Mountains and right next to town. And the town was ready to evacuate. And at the last minute, the wind came and turned the fire in a different direction. So that was the first tragedy. And then the second tragedy that started on July 4th was a Montana State graduate went hiking, and she was a big hiker, but she got lost. And so the search and rescue team of the local fire department was searching for her all summer. Helicopters going up mountain trails into the Beartooth Mountains every day, trying to find this lost student. And they eventually found her remains, but not until August. And then the third tragedy was when Dan was on a fire and the wind picked up and caught him, the wind picked up within seconds and built this huge wall of fire that ran right at him and caught him in this burnover. That was the third tragedy. So he's off in Utah in a coma. And then the fourth tragedy was another firefighter was skateboarding and fell and hit his head on the cement and ended up on life support because he was brain dead. And he eventually succumbed to his wounds. And they had a huge funeral for him. So it was the summer of hell. And they were desperate for Dan to live and come home. And he came out of his coma about the time that they were having Ryan's funeral and they found Tate's remains. And they said, okay, Dan, you've got to work to overcome your burns. And if you knew anything about burns, third-degree burns, and understand that's 60% of his body that they've got to do skin grafts for. So so the other 40%, they have to take the skin grafts from. So it's really 100% of his body that is just going through hell with wound care, PT. He's 65 years old. And I mean, he does not stand still. It was just the worst experience, just to wake up from the coma. At least his family was there, and he had been estranged from his family.
Okay.
Yeah. But they all came to Utah from different parts of the country because he was burned, and they all came together with one purpose in mind: to save Dan. While he was in the coma, and they established schedules, they established a routine, and then when he woke up from the coma, the local fire department, the Red Lodge Fire Department, his family, they all took turns staying with him, so somebody was with him all the time to try to help him recover. Because there's a whole chapter in the book that says, "Let me die." He really wanted to die. He had long talks with God about why am I still alive? Please just let me die. This hurts so bad. Stop the pain. Please stop it from hurting. I don't want to hurt anymore. So, and then when they told him Ryan had died and another friend had cancer, he just went, why am I still alive? Why can't you have these other young firefighters live and just take me? Because I'm in so much pain. It was a very big lesson in mortality, and he was struggling. So, I mean, his hands were burned so badly that he couldn't, it took him forever to pick up a 3-pound weight. It was just, so it was a really bad, big survival story about him and all the people who cared about him and what they were going through, to get him to recover and how much they needed him to come home because they just needed one win that summer. Yeah.
So I know you talked about, as you were writing the book, that you interviewed 50 different people in order to write the book. Why
Yes.
so many people? What were the things that you were trying to, I guess, ascertain or figure out as you were interviewing these people?
Well, first of all, I wanted to understand the local firefighters who were members of the fire department, and how fires worked, how fires were started, and how they defended fires, and how they were trained for fires. Because I wanted to know how Dan ended up in this fire, in this place to begin with, and I wanted to know about the people who cared about him, and I wanted to. So I set all that up. So the fire, when he gets burned, isn't until chapter 6. So there's a lot, so the people in the town, the people in the fire department are all in the first 5 chapters. So who the characters are, and these are real people and what they were going through. And I actually make characters out of the storm, the National Weather Service, the radio frequency, because part of the problem was it takes 20 minutes for the National Weather Service information to actually get to the radio frequency for an announcement to be made about what to look out for. And so, and I talk about how the weather works and how and how the Weather Service makes notifications and how the radio frequencies work and what channels they're on, because everybody was on the radio frequency listening in, to their firefighters, where everybody was. But so Dan was just putting out this small little grass fire in his engine with other engines, that were around, and there's characters in each engine, people that cared about him. And then all of a sudden, there was a storm 60 miles away that the Weather Service had not yet gotten an email out to the people that were close by. And in front of that storm was something called a downdraft that can hit in front of that storm, at least, 60 miles in front of it. And they were about to send out the weather alert that, look for high winds in this area. Here it came right at Dan. He picked up that little bitty fire into a wall 60 feet high, coming right at him, and just burned right over him. Wow. And then when he screamed burned over on his radio, everybody listening was like, who the hell's that? Can't be one of our guys, can't be one of our engines, because his engine was burned over, he was burned over. And then everybody started listening to the panicked voices, get the ambulance here now. Because Dan didn't realize he was hurt. He could everything on him was hot and he was taking it off. But he kept saying he wanted to stay in the fight. Wow. First of all, you have to know Dan. Dan is a really tough guy. And he's basically, he's as tough as Montana, basically.
Was he born in Montana?
He's born in Montana.
Okay.
So I talk about the people from Montana and what it's like to live in Montana. So he's as tough as the land in which he was born, basically. And even the fire chief says, we're lucky that it was Dan that this happened to, because he's so tough. And because anybody else, it would have killed him. But he finally 2 different fire chiefs had to come up to him and say, calm down, Dan, get in the ambulance. We're taking you to the hospital. And so I interviewed all those firefighters. I interviewed the EMT that put him in the ambulance, because she said that it was one of the most profound experiences of her life with him in the ambulance. I interviewed all the doctors that got him at the Billings Hospital, that were talking to him as he was saying, I don't think I'm hurt. And then I interviewed all the people in Utah, from the honor guard to the doctors to the wound care people, because of what he was going through, what the care is, and then and the honor guards, what they do. The people in Cal Fire, first of all, the Utah Fire Authority used to not have an honor guard. Now it's one of the best in the country, but they learned how to have an honor guard from Cal Fire. So all those fires in California, I talk about some of the fires there. Mm-hmm. Dan had been on some of those fires, but the Cal Fire had an honor guard that helped Utah once on a very sad and tragic fire for one of their firefighters. And once that happened, then Utah said, we're going to set up an honor guard, because the burn center is at the Utah hospital they welcome so many burn survivors coming into Salt Lake City. But also I had to interview all of his family and find out why they were estranged, what it felt like to come to Utah and see each other and get along. So
yeah, and I have a couple of questions about that. First, I just want to understand what an honor guard does. What is the purpose of an honor guard? What do they? I know that you said they came from California, but what is an honor guard?
Well, it started in California, but then Utah created its own. First of all, they show up in full dress uniform, cover to shoe, shiny shoes, medals, belts, everything, and for the honor of standing guard of a fellow firefighter as he dies. And then they had the flag ready to go. They're going to escort their casket, all the way to the funeral. So it's what it is. It's an honor guard in full dress uniform. And they support the family. They honor the dying firefighter. I mean, that whole chapter that I wrote about them brings me to tears just thinking about it. And the response, as I mentioned, the response of this book has been that it's a real tearjerker, but I tried to pace it so that you don't cry throughout. You have moments where you have to stop and cry, because the hardest part, I think, for the town was what the town was going through and how much they needed him to come home. And when he finally did, the only reason he could was because they were going to continue his care. They're a town full of caregivers that said, Dan can't sit still. Dan hates it in Utah. He wants to come home. Let him come. He was supposed to be there 6 months, but he came home early after about 2 months because they all said, we'll finish his wound care. We'll finish his PT. We'll feed him. We'll get him to doctors. And his brother also came home with him. And because of that, he was able to come home early because the entire town just took care of him.
Gotcha. Now, was his brother estranged from him before he had the fire, or was he, and he decided to take care of him, or was it just
first of all, his brother was a patient, had a lot of experience with patient advocacy in hospitals to begin with. His brother was pretty much estranged from all of Dan's kids, but kind of kept in contact with Dan, but they were far away geographically. And his brother's also a very, walks with God, I would say, a lot. So he was very much into prayer, and he was a little brother. So, so he, and Dan had always been the big brother, strong guy. So he, and Dan's also kind of he talks about what a jerk he is in the book, that, he just wants to be on his own, doesn't want to talk to people, doesn't open up, leave me alone. And that's how he treated everybody in his family, because the woman that he had been with for over 15 years had died. That's part of the story as well. So that's part of the reason he was a grumpy old man, which is a syndrome that a lot of firefighters fall into that syndrome when they're not fighting fires, especially the old ones. So he was already a grumpy old man before this happened. And, and not very happy about a lot of things. He had stopped talking to people, stopped having friendships, stopped being close to his family, because the woman that he had been with for, 15 years had died the year before. And, and he had just thrown himself into fighting big fires. He wanted to go to California fires, and he was an engine boss fighting big fires. And that's all he did. He trained and trained and trained and fought fires. And his brother, every time I talk to his brother, I mean, what a sweet, wonderful man who would just give me so much insight. And it helped me open Dan up. I had to pry Dan open to get him to tell me his feelings about everything, to tell me about what it was like to talk to God, to tell me how he felt like dying, because he does not share easily. And he and I had to become really close and have a very trusted friendship to write this book, because there were things I wrote in there that were pretty harsh about the real Dan. And I'd say, okay, Dan, I want you to read what I've just written because it's kind of hard to read. And he'd say, okay. and he'd say, well, it's the truth, isn't it? I said, well, yeah, I think it is. He said, well, then put it in there. So
Wow.
it's a pretty accurate book about the man he is. He's very honest about who he is. He has, he has no qualms about who he is. He says, this is who I am, take me or leave me. And so that's kind of what I put in the book,
Now you said he had kids.
Yes.
And
They're grown. They're grown kid. He has a daughter and a son, both grown. And then he has the woman that he lived with for 15 years. She had 2 daughters and they're grown. And so they all came and took turns.
And so now his recovery, that sounds like that was a long, even though they brought him back to town, how's he doing now? Between how long it took to recover?
Well, they were supposed to take 3 years, but 2 years later, he asked me to start writing his book about a year later, no, in 2022. And so in 2023, there's a thing called a pack test that firefighters have to go through. It's a 3-mile hike carrying 45 pounds, and you have to do it in under 45 minutes. So I got this text one day. It said 43:10. And I went, what's that? He said, that's my pack test time. So he had passed his pack test. And so he was qualified to be a firefighter again after 2 years. And the following week, he was going back for his final skin graft. And I was going with him because I wanted to go see the hospital and meet everybody in Utah because I needed to write about it. And so when he did his pack test, he was bleeding, like he said, like a stuck pig. And we get to Utah, and I said, well, they said, you're crazy. What have you done? I said, well, he passed his pack test. And they were like, he's just the absolute worst patient because he never thinks anything's wrong. He's always saying he's just fine. He's okay. Leave me alone. I want to go home. And they're trying to help him. He's just a stubborn son of a gun. And he will admit to that. And I say in the book, he was gone from grumpy old man to tough son of a bitch. That was what the workman's comp guy always said, because the workman's comp was reading the bills for all the surgeries he's had. He had so many surgeries and went through so much in Utah. And the workman's comp said, my God, this guy must be one tough son of a bitch. But it was the highest workman's comp bill claim in Montana to pay for all this. So he's gone from grumpy old man to tough son of a bitch to stubborn old fool are the 3 syndromes that I said that he went through but he needed every one of those to survive, to get back. But it's public knowledge now. I can tell you that in the last year he did develop, and this is not related to the burn, he did develop small cell lung cancer. And so that's why he's not doing the podcast with me, is because he just doesn't want to. He just doesn't look as well as he'd like to look because he's going through chemo for the small cell lung cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. But I must tell you, if you really want to piss him off, say something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He hates that. He's in his mind, he's got people who care about him, and he's living in beautiful Montana, and he's had a great life. And so if anybody feels sorry for him, that's just going to piss him off. So that's the last thing you should do.
Wow.
Yeah.
When I think about you in this project and deciding to put it together, what are some of the things that changed maybe you and your identity a little bit about after seeing this and interviewing these incredible people, and maybe your view of what firefighting was all about before what it is now? How has this experience changed you?
That's a good question. I actually had a couple of friends of mine, one's in Canada, said after I read this book, every time I see a fire engine, I have a much deeper appreciation for those guys on those fire engines. And and I do too. I had to do so much research on how fires start, how weather,
Mhm.
fuel, especially in Montana. I mean, everyone who lives in Montana, has a very healthy sense of fire season. And so we always stay alert. But I learned so much about, fire and firefighters and fire training, um, that and first responders, that changed my appreciation for how that works, because that was, to me, is essential to explain a lot of what happened in the book. And then I met so many burn survivors as well, and what they go through and the attitude they end up having to carry on. They have first of all, Dan was not accepting his new life. He just was miserable and people would tell him it does get better. And he's like, yeah, right. Yeah. He said, they could tell me all day long, but until I see it. And he finally saw it with one guy who, a lot of these burn survivors are actually amputees because they've lost limbs in fires.
Oh, yeah.
And he would meet them, and they were really good guys. They're good ladies. And they were, going through life now fine. They had found normalcy, they'd gone back to normalcy. And they said, between the past and the future is acceptance. And the problem with Dan was he just had a hard time accepting it. He finally did. He finally accepted it. But it took knowing the other burn survivors and seeing what they could do before he would. And I think, I think partly what changed me was all the relationships I developed from the people in Red Lodge, the burn survivors, the firefighters, and my relationship with Dan has impacted me greatly. Somebody once asked me, was it fun to write this book? No, it was not fun. Dan cried, I cried. Every interview I did, there were tears. There were always tears in every interview I did, because to have these people remember what they went through, it was really difficult for everyone. And so it was not fun, but it was incredibly important to memorialize this summer for Red Lodge. And burn survivors have told me that they really think it's a really good burn book. Firefighters have told me it's a really good fire book. So, I felt like I had to get it right. It was very important for me to get it right. And I had to really up my narrative writing skills, because that's not what I do. I'm not a narrative writer. And so there's a lot of journalism mixed in there. I'm not going to win any narrative awards, I know, because I've kind of blended a lot of, there's a lot of journalism in there because I have so many direct quotes from so many people. But that's just kind of how the story unfolded for me, with some narrative writing, with some creative license to try to imagine how the scene unfolded. And then some journalistic style, but it's, but so far the response I've gotten has been very good from the people I cared about. And I'm happy with the response. And I mean, I was so nervous because I just felt so responsible for getting it right for so many people. And so far everybody's happy. So.
Including you, right? Are you happy with that?
Yes, I am. I see tiny little errors in there that, on the second printing, I'm going to go back and fix, but not too many. Yeah.
Okay. Is there another book for you at some point? Is this done? Yes, I know now that I have a narrative novel out there. I have another one in the works. Yes. I also have another children's book coming up, but it's a pop-up book. I work with an artist named Kevin Redstar, who's actually a national treasure. If anybody wants to Google Kevin Redstar, they'll find out that he's world renowned. And the last book we did together was actually accepted. It was chosen by the Library of Congress as one of their top one. They pick two from every state every year, and it was one of the two picked from Montana. In 2023, and it's a beautiful book, and it's called Elk Morning at the Battle of Arrow Creek. And so I love working with Kevin Redstar because he's just one of the greatest artists we have now, still living. And he and I are working on a second book that's a pop-up. His artwork pops up, and it's called "I Saw Like a Crow on the Elk River." So, yeah. That sounds. Why did you pick children's books? What was children's books?
It was a project I did with some of my students. I'm the advisor of Indigenous people on campus, and it was a project that we started with some students that I have on campus, and it just kind of grew from there. And now they've all graduated, so it just keeps going from there. Yeah.
It sounds like Montana has been a great place. You said you moved to Montana.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like it has just become part of you, or you've become part of it.
It's home. I remember when I got this job, I was flying back to where I was working in the corporate world, and I met I was sitting next to a couple on the airplane, and I said, "Well, I just got this job to go be a professor in Montana," and they said, "Boy, that sounds like a movie." And I thought, "Yeah, it really does," and it almost has been, because I have horses and I ski, and so yes, my life is as beautiful as a movie. It is.
And do you miss the corporate side of things? And
No, I don't. I don't. But I have the opportunity with my students to take on a lot of projects, that real projects, and so I still feel like I'm doing strategy and creating marketing campaigns every day. So.
One of the things that has happened lately with, and I have a few friends from Montana, is the spotlight on Montana. Yellowstone is now this big feature show, movies with, I guess, 3 different series and stuff. And how far off is what they're Hollywood's portraying in Montana from what life is really like in Montana?
Well, we don't brand people in Montana.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, it's it's hard for me to say. There's a lot of things that aren't accurate. But I think that there's, we have tried to develop a lot more respect for our Indigenous people. Cattle is very important. So I guess those 2 things are accurate. Yeah.
I was actually, my grandma grew up on a Choctaw reservation. So I had
on which reservation?
Choctaw reservation in Oklahoma.
Oh, well, see, I'm from Oklahoma.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oklahoma. Yeah, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I grew up in Enid, and I moved to Ada when I was in high school.
Okay.
And so I have all my first cousins have Choctaw in their background, but very little. In fact, I give them a hard time. I say, "You have more Virginian in you than you have Choctaw. I mean, your Choctaw relatives are from Florida, frankly." I said, "You go back so far that you might as well say you're from Florida."
Yes. And she had to flee Oklahoma when she was 14, and she ended up in California, and that's where she met my grandpa. And so, we have all the stories from there. But as I watched some of the, the portrayal of, the schools,
right. It's horrific. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And I know it's probably even worse than they're portraying. And as you are an advisor now that gets to advise Indigenous folks, I want to kind of just know, just I guess my own selfish, how is that been to help them into, I guess, flourishing lives and fulfilled lives, because I don't want to say we want integration is silly, but just, as they go through their lives and what you're able to help them do.
Well, I know that, I don't want to speak for any Indigenous person. But one thing that we belong to American Indigenous business leaders. And so my students compete in the National Business Plan program every year. And we've been 6-time national champions, which we're very proud of. And we compete against all tier 1 universities. Yeah. So we're very proud of that. The main thing that we like to emphasize is that, American Indians is not one thing. Every tribe is its own culture. And that's something that I think is a message that we still have to keep pushing over and over and over again. Crow is very different than Cheyenne. It's very different than Sioux. It's like saying Italians, Germans, Spanish. You can't go to Europe and lump all those cultures together. And we have made that mistake of trying to do that here. All these tribes are all different. And so the children's books that I have in the Montana curriculum are all Crow books. So they had to be tribally specific, because the students that I wrote them with are Crow, and so and Kevin Red Star is Crow. So
okay. Well, it's so important.
Apsolica is the name of the tribe. Apsolica. Apsolica. Yeah.
Apsolica. Okay.
Yeah.
It's so important to not try to lump. I thank you for saying that, because different cultures, just like there are different cultures in the rest of the melting pot that we call America. But it's just so neat to know that there are folks like yourself who not only understand that, but are working hard, to make sure that those opportunities are available.
So when you say prosper, part of prospering is also including the culture. The music, the jewelry, the language, the dress, the land. So prospering does include restoring the culture and not losing it, because so much of it was lost in the schools, as you say. And anything I can do to help with that and help my students retain their culture as they prosper. You can't do one without the other, would be my response to your question.
No, absolutely. So what has been, you have the book, you're teaching there, you're working with Indigenous folks. What's your favorite part about, hey, I left corporate America, which, I'm sure you're a very driven person, so I'm sure you did very well in corporate America. But what has been your journey and just how you feel about life and everything else is?
Well, I have to say that the last 2.5 years working with Dan in this book with Red Lodge has been really significant for me. It was such an important story. But also working with Kevin Red Star, because he's really a national treasure, considered, one of the greatest artists of our time. So working with both those men in the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, has kind of transformed my ability, or how I can what I consider my talent to be. And I think I'm going to be here 3 more years is my goal, because I'm coming up on 70 pretty soon.
3 more years at the university. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not feeling it.
Well, I'm actually chair of the department right now, and chair's term is 4 years, but I've agreed to do 3 because I'm close to 70 years old. So you always have to think of, well, what do you do after after this? And so I'm hoping that if I think about your question, you have to realize that maybe you do have other things that you can contribute. And so I'm hoping that, doing these types of things will be what I contribute going forward. If people continue to respond well to them, then I'll continue.
And I'm so excited. Just us having this conversation is so neat for me, because as I think is, when I was working at the university and understanding, what you have to do in order to be tenured, what you have to do in order to, the articles you have to write. And you go, okay, is this really, I guess it is contributing. You're contributing to the body of knowledge, but it's so different than the creative side that I'm saying with you. Like when I think about children's books, I don't think of academic writing. When I think of this thing that you did with Mr. Feldman, I just, I see such a neat place for somebody who has that talent that we don't want it to go away. And so, I just see you sitting there as a chair of department, torn maybe a little bit with, but I guess because you have students that you get to do stuff with, but at the same time, it's fun to see that you're flourishing in your, writing of some really creative. A pop-up book just sounds so exciting.
It's it's not that it's easy, because I always felt like I had some talent, but not enough to make a living at it,
Mhm, mhm.
but I've always worked with talented people, talented artists, talent, that, in marketing, you work with very talented people who do make a living at it. So I always felt like I was on the peripheral of really talented people. And so now that I'm going to go into retirement and not have to make a living at it, I feel like I can do it. I can do it,
Yeah.
and enjoy the process of just being creative with my own. But I've been working pretty hard, like I said, the last few years at developing, getting better at writing, getting better at working with really, but I've always worked with great artists, but, working with Kevin is, beyond. I mean, when I realized I was going to work with Kevin Red Star, I kind of dropped to my knees. I'm like, oh my God, Kevin Red Star. So what you said, you really, picked up on the fact that the transition from being, the transition from doing it in the corporate world to then teaching it, for the second half of my career, and now transitioning into actually being creative.
Yeah, creating
These are all transitions, but
yeah.
I'm excited about really working on my creative skills. You have to work at it though. You have to
It almost
practice.
seems like
You have
you
to
went
work at it. You
backwards.
have to try. Yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems like you went backwards, right? You, instead of going creative to the business, or to teaching the business, you went, down to the creative side. But I kind of have to ask, because I know some of our listeners are going to want to know, because you have this marketing background and now you're
Mhm.
writing these books. Are you able to kind of marry the two and use all the marketing ideas and the marketing stuff in order
Uh,
to make your book pop? And
It's tough. It's tough. I had to have somebody help me figure out how to market this book,
uh,
and so I'm doing the best I can. Especially since I teach full time and I'm the chair of the department full time. Um, I'm just doing the best I can to get the word out about Dan's book, because it's an important book, and I want, the more people read it, I think the more it'll help people. It really does help a lot of people, and I'm doing the best I can to get the word out about what a good book it is. So
yeah, well,
yeah.
and you mentioned that you're almost 70. You're 68 today, I think is what you told
Hmm.
me. And
Yes.
you told the group you're almost 70 in a couple more years. Um, but the way marketing and technology and the way that you've had to perceive over your career, does it seem like it's just way different and you just got to rely on other people? Or is it, I mean,
Oh, good question. Because I tell my students that, with AI and everything coming on, I mean, I'm obsolete every day. When I
mhm,
started, we used to set type,
yeah,
So and the way we teach now, with everything's online or high flex, or, I've had to keep up with technology. In fact, I'm the last old person. All the professors I started with have retired. They said, some of them retired early because they didn't want to have to learn how to teach online. So the fact that I've kept up to the best that I can with all the teaching technology, so I'm still here, is one thing. But the marketing technology, is just, I'm obsolete every day. I have to have my students or my nieces and nephews tell me which buttons to push, to keep, so I can keep up with what's available. And I tell my students, you guys are going to be in a whole new world when it comes to marketing, when it comes to anything. Um, my last real job was with Sprint PCS, and we launched the first all digital phone from the ground up, so that was far and above the old analog cellular phones. And so I was in a technology company my last job. Um, so that, to me, I did my part in technology in the corporate world. But and that was sort of the beginning of exponential growth in technology. It's just unbelievable to keep up, and that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to just being creative, because I don't think I could keep up, frankly, at my age. And I didn't grow up with
yeah,
email.
yeah,
I didn't do email until I was in my 30s. I didn't start teaching online until I was in my 50s. I didn't start teaching high flex until I was in my 60s. So, and some of the professors we have here now, they got their PhDs online. I can't imagine. I got my PhD on grass, meaning I went to campus, right?
Yeah, and the card catalogs and all the other
Yeah,
stuff.
right. And card. Yes, I did research at the library with a card catalog. Exactly.
Yeah,
So
really.
I really have to retire. A couple more years, and that's about all I'm going to be able to keep up with. I do not think I could keep up with what my students are going to have to keep up with to do the job. So.
Oh yeah, no, I can, just to remember, when I started teaching at Cal State San Bernardino, I was teaching a software called FredMail that we had on Apple IIe's, and then we were so excited because it would take 3 days for an email to get from California to New York, and that was like the coolest thing
Yes.
ever. Oh my gosh, what
Right.
I love the fact that you are here and you're doing it and you're making it happen and you're showing people that this is possible to be creative, to go out there, to take on a project and to thrive at it. And so is there any, as we wind down, is there any last things that you would love to just, encourage folks with or tell people, based on the things that you're doing? I definitely want folks to go out and get the book, and I think it's an important work, and, you've done just such an amazing job.
The book is available in Kindle and Audible and in print.
Okay.
And it's, on Amazon, so everywhere. If you're in Montana or Wyoming, it's in most retail bookstores. But Kindle, Audible, and in fact, the Audible sample on Amazon is the fire when he gets burned. So it's kind of exciting. So it's called Burned Over, the survival of Montana firefighter Dan Steffensen.
It's Steffensen, all right.
Steffensen, yeah.
I have to ask this before you jump in. Audible, who read the book? How did it get done?
Yeah, a professional.
Okay.
Yeah, a guy named, oh my God, it's Dan Peterson. I think I just.
Okay.
We've been talking. Let me make sure I've got that right.
Okay. Were you like the director too, as he was reading, or you just?
Wait, no, wait. I think it's. Maybe it's. Gosh, I talked to him so much.
Yeah, because I can see you involved in the whole project, every piece of it. So to have somebody else read your book and
his last, yeah. I hang on. I'm going to give you the name. I'm going to give you the name of Audible. I'm going to go there real fast. Okay. I feel so bad because he's a good friend, and you know how you get a blank, you go blank all of a sudden. I hope he doesn't watch this. Burned. I need my glasses on.
I love it.
Burned over. Oh. It's Andy. I'm sorry. Before I even looked it up, I knew it was Andy. Andy Pearson. Silly me. Andy Pearson. Yes, and he's very good. Sorry, Andy. I went blank. Andy Pearson.
Well, we took the time to make sure that we gave Andy the recognition from it. And
he does a very good job reading it. Yeah, he's a pro.
Oh,
right.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, good. So the book is Burned Over, and Dan Steffensen.
Dan Steffensen.
And the children's books that you have out, and we just talked to AJ, and hey,
also available online on Amazon.com.
Amazon.com. Okay. Yeah. So you can get the book anywhere. I suggest that you go get it. You read it. It is important work, and I can tell the thought and the effort that was put into it is a read that is so well worth it. And it has been a pleasure to meet you, AJ. It's been a pleasure.
You too. I really enjoyed talking to you. I did. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. And so, if you're watching this and you know somebody who should read the book, send them, this podcast. Not only send them the title of the book, but send them this podcast, and they can hear all about it and get more. And then if there's things that you can definitely get through subscribing and all these great guests that we have on the podcast. Again, AJ, thank you for being on, and we'll look forward to talking to you, each and every single one of you, on the next one. And have a wonderful, just incredible day today.
Thank you so much.